Sarah Martinez had always prided herself on being punctual. Every morning at exactly 8:15 a.m. she would walk into the cozy downtown coffee shop called Morning Brew, with her designer handbag clutched tightly and her phone already buzzing with work emails. She had claimed the same corner table by the window for the past 3 years, and everyone who worked there knew it was Sarah's spot. The coffee shop was her sanctuary before facing another demanding day as a marketing executive at a prestigious firm. She would order her usual vanilla latte with oat milk, spread out her laptop and papers, and spend exactly 45 minutes reviewing presentations and answering urgent messages. This routine was sacred to her, and she had never been challenged on it until that particular Tuesday morning in October. The autumn air was crisp and golden leaves danced outside the large windows as Sarah pushed through the glass door at her usual time. The familiar smell of freshly ground coffee beans and warm pastries greeted her, along with the gentle hum of quiet conversations and the soft jazz music that always played in the background. She nodded to Marcus, the young barista who knew her order by heart, and headed straight toward her corner table. But something was different today. A young woman with curly brown hair and a bright yellow sweater was walking toward the same table, carrying a steaming cup of tea and what appeared to be a thick textbook. Sarah quickened her pace, her heels clicking against the wooden floor with determination. She had to reach the table first. The young woman looked to be in her early 20s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She had a slight British accent that Sarah could hear as she politely thanked another customer for holding the door open behind her. There was something warm and genuine about her presence that seemed to light up the space around her, but Sarah was too focused on securing her territory to notice these details. Sarah reached the table just moments before the British girl and quickly placed her expensive leather purse on the chair to claim it. The young woman stopped in her tracks, looking confused and slightly disappointed. She glanced around the busy coffee shop, searching for another available seat, but every table was occupied by the morning rush of students, business people, and freelancers. "Excuse me," the British girl said softly, her voice carrying a polite tone despite the awkward situation. "I was just heading to this table. Would it be possible to share it? There seem to be 4 chairs, and I only need one." Sarah looked up from her phone with an expression of barely concealed annoyance. She had been typing furiously, already deep into responding to a client's demanding email about a campaign deadline. The interruption felt like an intrusion into her carefully structured morning routine. "Actually, I need this entire table for my work," Sarah replied curtly, not bothering to look up from her screen. "I have important presentations to review, and I need the space to spread out my materials. You'll have to find somewhere else to sit." The British girl's face fell slightly, but she maintained her composure. "I understand you're busy, but I have an important exam to study for, and I've been looking forward to having a quiet place to review my notes. Perhaps we could both use the table? I promise I won't disturb you." Sarah finally looked up, her eyes cold and dismissive. "Listen, I don't know how things work where you're from, but I've been coming here for 3 years. This is my table during my time slot. I have a very important job and very important clients who depend on me. Your studying can wait, or you can find another coffee shop." The entire conversation had been loud enough for several nearby customers to overhear. A businessman reading his newspaper glanced over with a frown. 2 college students sharing a small table near the window exchanged uncomfortable looks. Even Marcus behind the counter had paused his coffee grinding to listen, his expression showing clear disapproval of Sarah's behavior. The British girl stood there for a moment, holding her tea and textbook, clearly processing the hostile response she had received. Her cheeks had turned slightly pink with embarrassment, not just from the rejection but from the public nature of the confrontation. Other customers were now openly staring at the interaction. "I'm sorry you feel that way," the young woman said, quietly, her voice maintaining its gentle tone despite the obvious hurt in her eyes. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I hope you have a productive morning." With that, she turned away from the table and began scanning the coffee shop again, looking for any available space where she could sit and study. The morning rush was at its peak, and finding an empty seat seemed impossible. Sarah watched her walk away with a sense of satisfaction, then immediately returned her attention to her laptop screen as if nothing had happened. But something had shifted in the atmosphere of the coffee shop. The usual warm, welcoming energy felt different now. Several customers continued to glance in Sarah's direction, and their expressions weren't friendly. Marcus shook his head disapprovingly as he steamed milk for another customer's drink. Two elderly women at a nearby table were whispering to each other and occasionally looking over with obvious disapproval. Sarah tried to focus on her emails, but she found herself becoming increasingly aware of the tension she had created. The British girl had found a spot at the counter along the wall, perched uncomfortably on a tall stool with her textbook balanced precariously as she tried to study. Every few minutes, Sarah found her eyes drifting in that direction, though she quickly looked away whenever their gazes might meet. As Sarah sipped her vanilla latte and attempted to review her presentation slides, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. She had defended her territory successfully, but the victory felt somehow hollow. The coffee shop, which had always been her peaceful retreat, now felt charged with an uncomfortable energy that she had created, but didn't know how to dispel. Little did Sarah know that this seemingly small act of selfishness was about to set in motion a series of events that would completely change her perspective on kindness, privilege, and the unexpected ways that life has of teaching us important lessons when we least expect them. 20 minutes had passed since Sarah had claimed her table, and the morning was not going as smoothly as she had planned. Her usual sense of control and productivity seemed to be slipping away with each passing moment. Every time she tried to focus on her laptop screen, she became aware of the British girl struggling to study at the uncomfortable counter stool. The young woman kept shifting her position, trying to find a way to balance her heavy textbook while taking notes. Her tea had gone cold, sitting forgotten beside a stack of colorful sticky notes and highlighters. Sarah noticed that she was studying what appeared to be medical textbooks, with complex diagrams of the human anatomy and detailed notes written in neat handwriting that covered every available margin. Marcus approached Sarah's table with a fresh pot of coffee, his usual friendly smile notably absent. "Would you like a refill on your latte?" he asked, his tone professional but lacking its typical warmth. "Yes, thank you," Sarah replied, not looking up from her presentation. She was trying to concentrate on a crucial slide about market demographics, but the numbers seemed to blur together on her screen. As Marcus poured the coffee, he glanced toward the British girl at the counter. "You know," he said quietly, "Emma has been coming here every morning for the past 2 weeks to study for her medical school entrance exams. She's always polite to everyone and tips well despite clearly being on a tight budget." Sarah looked up sharply. "I don't recall asking for information about other customers." Marcus paused his pouring for a moment. "Just thought you might want to know. She's been working really hard and those exams determine her entire future. She mentioned yesterday that this is her last week to study before the test." The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Sarah felt a small pang of something uncomfortable in her chest, but she quickly pushed it aside. She had her own responsibilities and deadlines to worry about. Her client presentation was due in 2 hours, and she couldn't afford to be distracted by guilt over a stranger's problems. "Well, everyone has their challenges," Sarah said dismissively, returning her attention to her laptop. "I have my own important deadlines to meet." Marcus finished pouring and walked away without another word, but Sarah could feel his disapproval radiating across the coffee shop. She tried to shake off the uncomfortable feeling and dove back into her work, but concentration remained elusive. The coffee shop was bustling with its usual morning crowd, but Sarah began to notice how different the interactions seemed compared to her own earlier encounter. At the table next to hers, an elderly man was sharing his newspaper with a woman who had forgotten to bring reading material. Near the window, 2 strangers had struck up a conversation about their shared interest in photography after noticing each other's cameras. Even more telling was how other customers were treating Emma, the British girl. A businessman who had finished his breakfast offered her his vacated table, but she politely declined, explaining that he had been there first, and she didn't want to rush him. A group of nursing students recognized her textbooks and invited her to join their study session, but she thanked them and explained she preferred to study alone to maintain her focus. Every interaction Emma had with other people was marked by courtesy, gratitude, and consideration for others. She apologized to Marcus when she accidentally knocked over a sugar dispenser, immediately helping to clean it up despite his assurances that it wasn't necessary. She offered to help an overwhelmed mother carry her coffee and diaper bag to a table while managing her fussy toddler. Sarah found herself watching these exchanges despite her attempts to focus on work. There was something genuinely magnetic about Emma's kindness, and it was having a noticeable effect on everyone around her. People seemed to light up when they interacted with her, and the general atmosphere of the coffee shop felt warmer in the areas where she moved. Meanwhile, Sarah's own presence seemed to have the opposite effect. The customers at nearby tables were giving her more space than usual, and their conversations seemed more subdued when she was within earshot. She had become an island of tension in what was typically a harmonious environment. Her phone buzzed, with a text message from her colleague Janet. Running late for the client meeting. Can you handle the presentation setup? You're so much better at these things anyway. Sarah stared at the message with growing frustration. This was the third time this month that Janet had dumped additional responsibilities on her at the last minute. She was always the one who had to arrive early, stay late, and handle the difficult clients. Her dedication to her career had earned her respect and success, but it had also made her the default choice for every challenging situation. As she typed a response agreeing to handle the setup, Sarah caught a glimpse of Emma struggling with her medical textbook again. A diagram of the circulatory system slipped from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. Emma climbed down from her stool to retrieve it, nearly losing her balance in the process. For just a moment, Sarah felt an impulse to offer help, or even to invite Emma to share the spacious table, but she quickly suppressed the thought. She had worked too hard to establish her position and routine to start making exceptions now. Success required discipline and boundaries, and she couldn't afford to become soft. The morning rush began to thin out as people headed to their offices and schools. The coffee shop grew quieter, making Emma's continued presence at the uncomfortable counter stool even more noticeable. She had been there for over an hour now, and Sarah could see that her neck was stiff from craning over her textbook. Sarah's presentation was nearly ready, but she found herself making unnecessary revisions just to avoid the growing awkwardness of the situation. Each time she glanced toward the counter, she saw Emma's determination to continue studying, despite the physical discomfort. And each time she felt a small knot of something unpleasant tightening in her stomach. The universe seemed to be setting up a lesson that Sarah wasn't yet ready to learn, but the stage was being carefully prepared for a moment of truth that would soon arrive whether she was prepared for it or not. Sarah was putting the finishing touches on her presentation when her phone rang. The caller ID showed her boss's name, Robert Chen, and she immediately felt her stomach tighten. Robert never called unless something was seriously wrong or exceptionally important. Sarah, I need you in my office immediately. Robert's voice was tense and urgent. We have a situation with the Morrison account, and I need to brief you before the client meeting. I'll be there in 15 minutes, Sarah replied, quickly closing her laptop and gathering her materials. The Morrison account was their biggest client, worth over $2 million annually, and any problems with that relationship could have serious consequences for her career. She rushed out of the coffee shop without a backward glance at Emma, who was still perched uncomfortably at the counter, surrounded by medical textbooks and notes. Sarah's heels clicked rapidly against the sidewalk as she hurried toward her office building, her mind racing with possibilities about what could have gone wrong with the Morrison account. The elevator ride to the 20th floor felt endless, and Sarah spent the time mentally reviewing every detail of their recent campaigns and client communications. When she finally reached Robert's office, she found him pacing behind his desk with a grim expression. "Sit down, Sarah," he said without preamble. "We need to talk." Sarah settled into the chair across from his desk, her notebook ready to take notes about whatever crisis they needed to address. Robert was known for his calm demeanor under pressure, so his obvious agitation was deeply concerning. "I just received a very disturbing phone call from Dr. Elizabeth Morrison," Robert began, referring to the CEO of Morrison Pharmaceuticals. "She's reconsidering our contract renewal." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "What happened?" "The campaign results have been excellent, and our last quarterly review was overwhelmingly positive. Robert sat down heavily in his chair and pulled up an email on his computer screen. Apparently, Dr. Morrison's daughter had an unpleasant encounter this morning that has left her questioning our company's values and character. Her daughter? Sarah repeated, confused about how a family member could possibly be connected to their business relationship. Emma Morrison, Robert continued, is Dr. Morrison's daughter. She's currently in London completing her pre-med studies and preparing for medical school entrance exams. She's been staying with relatives here for the past few weeks while taking her tests. The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. Emma, the British girl. The young woman she had refused to let share her table at the coffee shop was the daughter of their most important client. Sarah's mind raced as the implications became clear. Robert, I can explain. Can you? Robert interrupted, his voice sharp. Because according to Dr. Morrison, her daughter called her this morning in tears after being treated with shocking rudeness and cruelty by someone at a coffee shop downtown. Emma described being publicly humiliated by a woman who claimed to be too important to share a table with a struggling student. The room seemed to spin around Sarah. Every detail of the morning's encounter came flooding back with devastating clarity. Emma's polite request to share the table, her gentle explanation about studying for important exams, the hurt in her eyes when Sarah had dismissed her so coldly. Dr. Morrison is furious, Robert continued. She said that anyone capable of treating a young person with such callousness doesn't deserve to handle her company's reputation. She's particularly upset because Emma has been dealing with anxiety about her exams, and this incident has shattered her confidence. Sarah felt sick. I had no idea who she was. That's exactly the problem. Robert's voice rose. It shouldn't matter who she was. The fact that you would treat any person that way reflects poorly on your character and, by extension, on our entire company. Dr. Morrison said she can't trust her brand to someone who lacks basic human decency. The weight of her actions was becoming crushingly clear. Sarah had spent 3 years building her relationship with the Morrison account, working late nights and weekends to ensure their campaigns exceeded expectations. She had prided herself on her professionalism and dedication. And now, in a single moment of selfish behavior, she had potentially destroyed everything. Is there anything I can do to fix this? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Robert was quiet for a long moment, staring at his computer screen. Dr. Morrison is flying in from London tomorrow morning for an emergency meeting. She wants to discuss whether to continue our partnership. I've managed to convince her to give us one chance to address her concerns. What does that mean? It means you have until tomorrow morning to figure out how to demonstrate that this company still deserves her trust. And Sarah, I need you to understand something very clearly. If we lose the Morrison account because of this incident, your position here will be in serious jeopardy. Sarah nodded numbly, the full scope of the disaster finally sinking in. Her career, which had been built on careful planning and strategic thinking, was now hanging by a thread because of a moment of thoughtless cruelty toward a stranger. There's something else, Robert added, his tone softening slightly. Dr. Morrison mentioned that Emma has been struggling with her confidence lately. She's brilliant and hardworking, but she's been doubting herself because of the pressure of the medical school admissions process. Your treatment of her this morning has apparently convinced her that she doesn't belong in professional settings. The guilt that Sarah had been trying to suppress all morning now hit her with full force. She had not only damaged her own career, but had also hurt a young woman who was already vulnerable and struggling with self-doubt. I want you to think very carefully about what you're going to say to Dr. Morrison tomorrow, Robert said. This isn't just about saving an account anymore. This is about taking responsibility for the harm you've caused and finding a way to make it right. As Sarah left Robert's office, her legs felt unsteady beneath her. The presentation she had been so focused on completing that morning now seemed trivial compared to the magnitude of what she had set in motion. She thought about Emma, still studying at that uncomfortable counterstool, completely unaware that her mother was halfway around the world fighting for justice on her behalf. The elevator doors closed, and Sarah caught sight of her reflection in the polished metal. For the first time in years, she didn't recognize the person staring back at her. The confident, successful executive she had always seen was gone. replaced by someone who had to confront the uncomfortable truth about what she had become in her pursuit of success. The next 24 hours would determine not just the future of her career, but the kind of person she was going to choose to be going forward. Sarah spent the rest of that Tuesday in a state of emotional turmoil that she had never experienced before. After leaving Robert's office, she had tried to return to her normal work routine, but concentration was impossible. Every email she attempted to write seemed hollow and meaningless compared to the weight of what she had done and what she now faced. By late afternoon, she gave up any pretense of productivity and decided to leave the office early. As she walked through the downtown streets, her feet automatically carried her back toward Morning Brew. She told herself she was just going there to think, but deep down she knew she was hoping to find Emma still there so she could somehow begin to make amends. The coffee shop was quieter in the late afternoon, filled mostly with freelancers working on laptops and a few teenagers sharing snacks after school. Sarah's usual corner table was empty, and seeing it vacant gave her a strange feeling of loss. For 3 years, that table had represented security and control in her daily routine. Now it felt like a symbol of her selfishness and misplaced priorities. Emma was nowhere to be seen, which was both a relief and a disappointment. Sarah ordered a coffee she didn't really want and sat at a small table near the window, watching the bustling street outside. People walked by with purpose and energy, going about their lives without the crushing weight of guilt that was now her constant companion. Marcus approached her table cautiously, clearly surprised to see her back so soon and without her usual work material spread out. "Can I get you anything else?" he asked, his tone neutral but not unfriendly. "Actually," Sarah said, surprising herself with the words, "I wanted to ask about Emma, the British girl who was here this morning. Do you know if she'll be back tomorrow?" Marcus studied her face carefully. "She comes in most mornings to study. Her medical school exams are next week, so I imagine she'll need every moment she can get to prepare." He paused, then added, "She seemed pretty upset when she left today. She usually stays until lunch, but she packed up right after you left." The knife of guilt twisted deeper in Sarah's chest. "Did she say anything about what happened?" "She didn't need to," Marcus replied quietly. "Everyone could see what happened. Emma is one of the kindest people who comes in here. She always asks about my classes, remembers details about other customers' lives, and tips generously even though she's clearly watching every penny. What you did to her was hard to watch." Sarah nodded, accepting the judgment in his words because she knew she deserved it. "If she comes in tomorrow morning, would you let her know that I'd like to speak with her? My name is Sarah." Marcus looked skeptical. "I'll mention it, but I can't promise she'll want to talk." She was pretty shaken up. That evening, Sarah sat in her expensive apartment overlooking the city skyline, surrounded by all the trappings of her professional success. The designer furniture, the awards on her walls, the closet full of high-end business attire. None of it provided any comfort. Now, instead, these possessions felt like hollow symbols of a life that had become disconnected from basic human values. She tried to draft an apology email to Dr. Morrison, but every attempt felt inadequate. How could she explain that she had treated someone's daughter with cruelty simply because she felt entitled to a coffee shop table? How could she justify behavior that she now recognized as fundamentally indefensible? Around midnight, Sarah found herself looking through her social media accounts, something she rarely did outside of work purposes. Her profiles were filled with professional accomplishments, networking events, and carefully curated images of success. But as she scrolled through years of posts, she realized that there were almost no pictures of genuine relationships or moments of personal joy. She thought about Emma's interactions with other people at the coffee shop that morning. The young woman had connected with strangers through simple acts of kindness and consideration. She had created warmth and positivity wherever she went, while Sarah had created tension and discomfort. The contrast was stark and painful to acknowledge. Sarah had spent so many years focused on building her career that she had forgotten how to simply be kind to another human being. She had become so protective of her time, space, and resources that she had lost touch with the basic empathy that should guide how people treat each other. Sleep was elusive that night. Sarah lay in her king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling, and replaying the morning's events over and over. She imagined how different things could have been if she had simply smiled and welcomed Emma to share the table. They might have had a pleasant conversation about Emma's studies or her experiences. Living in London, Sarah might have learned about the young woman's dreams of becoming a doctor and her nervousness about the upcoming exams. Instead, Sarah had chosen to see Emma as a threat to her routine, rather than as a fellow human being deserving of basic courtesy. She had prioritized her own perceived needs over someone else's dignity and comfort. The realization was humbling and deeply uncomfortable. As dawn approached, Sarah made a decision that surprised her. She was going to morning brew early the next morning, not to claim her usual table, but to wait for Emma and offer a sincere apology. It was a small step, but it felt like the only way to begin making things right. She also realized that she needed to completely rethink her approach to the meeting with Dr. Morrison. This wasn't going to be about salvaging a business relationship through clever explanations or strategic apologies. This was going to be about taking full responsibility for her actions and demonstrating genuine remorse and change. The night had been long and difficult, but it had also been necessary. For the first time in years, Sarah was forced to confront who she had become and who she wanted to be. The person she saw in that honest reflection was not someone she was proud of, but it was also not someone she had to remain. As the first light of dawn began to filter through her apartment windows, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, a sense of clarity about what truly mattered. Her career success would mean nothing if it came at the cost of her basic humanity. Tomorrow would be an opportunity to begin the difficult work of becoming a better person, regardless of the professional consequences. She had spent the night learning a lesson that should have been obvious all along. Treating others with kindness and respect isn't just the right thing to do. It's the foundation of a life worth living. Sarah arrived at morning brew at 7:30 the next morning, a full 45 minutes earlier than her usual time. The coffee shop was just beginning to fill with its early morning customers, and the familiar aroma of fresh coffee and baked goods felt different somehow. Less like a backdrop to her important routine and more like a welcoming embrace she had never properly appreciated. She chose a small table near the counter where Emma had been forced to sit the day before, deliberately, avoiding her usual corner spot by the window. Marcus was working behind the espresso machine, and he nodded, acknowledging her presence with what might have been the slightest hint of approval for her choice of seating. Sarah ordered a simple coffee and settled in to wait, her heart beating faster than normal with anxiety about the conversation she hoped to have. She had rehearsed various apologies during her sleepless night, but none of them felt adequate for the magnitude of what she had done. How do you apologize for stripping away someone's dignity in a public space? How do you make amends for contributing to a young person's self-doubt during an already stressful time? At 8 o'clock, the familiar yellow sweater appeared through the coffee shop's front door. Emma entered hesitantly, her eyes quickly scanning the space as if checking for potential sources of conflict. When her gaze landed on Sarah, her expression immediately became guarded and uncertain. Sarah's heart sank as she watched Emma's shoulders tense. The young woman's natural warmth and openness from the previous day had been replaced by wariness and self-protection. Sarah realized with painful clarity that she had been responsible for creating this change in someone who had approached the world with such genuine kindness. Emma ordered her tea and looked around the coffee shop for a place to sit. The counter, where she had spent the previous morning, was occupied by someone else, and several tables were available, including Sarah's usual corner spot. But instead of moving toward any of the open tables, Emma seemed frozen in place, as if unsure whether she belonged in the space at all. Sarah stood up slowly and walked over to where Emma was standing. "Emma," she said softly, her voice carrying none of the sharp confidence that had characterized their previous interaction. "My name is Sarah. I was hoping I could speak with you for a moment." Emma looked up with surprise and obvious apprehension. "I remember you," she said quietly, her British accent tinged with wariness. "You're the woman from yesterday?" "Yes, and I owe you a sincere apology," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion she hadn't expected to feel so strongly. My behavior yesterday was completely unacceptable, and I'm deeply sorry for how I treated you. Emma studied Sarah's face carefully, as if trying to determine whether this apology was genuine or simply another manipulation. You don't need to apologize, she said finally. I understand that you had important work to do. No, Sarah said, firmly, surprising both of them with the intensity of her response. You don't understand, and that's because I didn't give you the chance to understand. I treated you with cruelty and disrespect simply because I felt entitled to something that didn't actually belong to me. There was absolutely no excuse for my behavior. A few other customers had begun to notice their conversation, but Sarah no longer cared about creating a public scene. All that mattered now was making sure Emma understood that she deserved better treatment than she had received. Would you be willing to sit with me for a few minutes? Sarah asked. I know I have no right to ask for your time, but I'd like to explain something to you, and I'd also like to learn about you if you're comfortable sharing. Emma hesitated, clearly torn between her natural inclination to be polite and her understandable desire to protect herself from further hurt. After a long moment, she nodded slowly. I suppose I could sit for a few minutes. They walked together to Sarah's usual corner table, but this time the dynamic was completely different. Sarah pulled out Emma's chair first and waited for her to be seated before taking her own place. The table that had been a symbol of selfish territory claiming the day before now became a space for genuine human connection. I want you to know something important, Sarah began, looking directly into Emma's eyes. Yesterday, when you asked to share this table, you were being completely reasonable and polite. You had every right to expect basic courtesy from me, and instead I treated you with meanness that says nothing about your worth as a person and everything about my own character failings. Emma's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected such a direct acknowledgement of what had happened. I also want you to know, Sarah continued, that I learned last night exactly who you are, and while that knowledge has made me feel even worse about my behavior, it's not why I'm apologizing. I should have treated you with respect and kindness regardless of who your mother is or what your future plans might be. You know about my mother? Emma asked, her voice small. Sarah nodded. Dr. Morrison is one of my company's most important clients, and she called my boss yesterday after you spoke with her. But Emma, I want you to understand something crucial. You didn't deserve to be treated poorly yesterday, and you wouldn't have deserved to be treated poorly even if your mother had been anyone else in the world. Tears began to form in Emma's eyes. I called my mom because I was so confused about what had happened. I kept wondering what I had done wrong, whether I had been too presumptuous or rude somehow. I've been feeling so anxious about my exams already, and yesterday made me question whether I really belong in professional environments. The pain in Emma's voice was like a physical blow to Sarah's chest. She had not only been cruel in the moment, but her cruelty had planted seeds of self-doubt in someone who was already struggling with confidence. Emma, Sarah said, her voice urgent with the need to undo this damage. You belong everywhere you want to be. You were gracious and polite yesterday, and you handled my rudeness with more dignity than I deserved. The problem was never with you. It was entirely with me and my own issues. Sarah took a deep breath and decided to share something she had never admitted to anyone. I've spent so many years focused on building my career that I forgot how to connect with other people. Became so protective of my time and space that I lost touch with basic kindness. Yesterday, when you approached my table, I saw you as a threat to my routine instead of as a fellow human being who deserved respect. Emma listened intently, her expression softening as she began to understand the deeper issues behind Sarah's behavior. You have a gift, Sarah continued. I watched you interact with other people yesterday, and you bring warmth and kindness wherever you go. Don't let my moment of selfishness make you question that gift or your place in the world. Emma reached across the table and gently placed her hand over Sarah's, a gesture of forgiveness that was far more generous than Sarah felt she deserved. Thank you for telling me this, Emma said softly. I can see that you're genuinely sorry, and I appreciate you taking the time to explain. It helps me understand that yesterday wasn't really about me at all. The simple act of forgiveness from this young woman she had treated so poorly moved Sarah to tears. I don't deserve your kindness, she whispered. Everyone deserves kindness, Emma replied with a wisdom that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her 22 years. And everyone deserves the chance to learn and grow from their mistakes. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the weight of what had been shared. Then Emma smiled, and for the first time since entering the coffee shop, her natural warmth began to shine through again. Would you like to know about my studies? Emma asked. Since we're sharing this table properly now? For the next hour, Sarah listened as Emma talked about her dream of becoming a pediatric surgeon, her excitement about starting medical school, and her nervousness about the entrance exams that would determine her future. Sarah found herself genuinely invested in Emma's success and inspired by her dedication to helping children through medicine. When it was time for Sarah to leave for her meeting with Dr. Morrison, Emma stood up and gave her an unexpected hug. Good luck with your meeting, she said. I hope my mother isn't too hard on you. I'm going to call her this morning and tell her about our conversation. Sarah arrived at her office building 30 minutes later, feeling fundamentally changed by her conversation with Emma. The young woman's grace and maturity had shown her what true strength looked like, not the aggressive protection of territory and status that Sarah had mistaken for power, but the courage to remain open and kind even after being hurt. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison was already waiting in Robert's office when Sarah arrived. She was an elegant woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an unmistakable air of authority. Her expression was stern but not hostile as Sarah entered the room. Dr. Morrison, Sarah began before anyone else could speak, I want to start by offering you a sincere and complete apology for my treatment of your daughter yesterday. There is no excuse for my behavior, and I take full responsibility for the hurt I caused her. Dr. Morrison studied Sarah's face intently. Emma called me an hour ago, she said finally. She told me about your conversation this morning and asked me to give you another chance. She said you seemed genuinely remorseful and that she believes people can change. Sarah felt a wave of gratitude for Emma's intervention, but she knew she couldn't rely on the young woman's forgiveness alone. Dr. Morrison, regardless of Emma's generous nature, I want you to know that I understand the severity of what I did. I treated your daughter with disrespect and cruelty, and in doing so, I violated every principle that should guide professional relationships and human decency. What concerns me, Dr. Morrison said, is that this incident suggests a pattern of behavior. If you're capable of treating a struggling student with such callousness, how can I trust you to represent my company's values with sensitivity and integrity? Sarah took a deep breath. You're absolutely right to question that. I've spent so many years focused solely on professional success that I lost sight of what truly matters. Yesterday was a wake-up call that I desperately needed. I realized that all of my career achievements mean nothing if I've become someone who lacks basic compassion for others. Robert, who had been listening silently, leaned forward in his chair. Sarah, what specific changes are you planning to make? I'm committed to doing the work necessary to become a better person, Sarah replied. I'm going to start seeing a therapist to understand how I became so disconnected from empathy. I'm also going to volunteer at organizations that help students and young professionals, because I want to contribute positively to people's lives instead of creating obstacles for them. Dr. Morrison remained silent for a long moment, considering Sarah's words. Emma also told me that you encouraged her to pursue her medical school dreams and told her she belonged in professional environments. Is that accurate? Yes, Sarah said. Your daughter is remarkable. She's brilliant, kind, and dedicated. The medical profession will be fortunate to have her, and I made sure she understood that my behavior yesterday reflected my own problems, not any inadequacy on her part. Emma has struggled with confidence issues lately, Dr. Morrison admitted. The pressure of medical school admissions has been weighing on her, and your initial treatment of her confirmed her worst fears about whether she belongs in competitive professional environments. Sarah felt the familiar pang of guilt. I'm horrified that I contributed to her self-doubt. She deserves to feel confident about her abilities and her place in the world. Dr. Morrison stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Emma told me something interesting this morning. She said that watching you apologize and take responsibility for your actions taught her something important about integrity and growth. She said it gave her hope that even when people make serious mistakes, they can choose to do better. The irony was not lost on Sarah. In trying to make amends for hurting Emma, she had inadvertently provided the young woman with a valuable lesson about accountability and personal growth. "Dr. Morrison," Sarah said, "I know that you have every right to end our business relationship. If you choose to do so, I will understand completely. But I want you to know that regardless of your decision about the account, meeting Emma has changed me in profound ways. She showed me grace that I didn't deserve and helped me see the person I want to become." Dr. Morrison returned to her seat and looked directly at Sarah. "I've built my company on the principle that people deserve second chances when they demonstrate genuine remorse and commitment to change. Emma believes in your capacity for growth, and her judgment means more to me than any business relationship." Sarah felt a surge of hope mixed with determination. "If you're willing to give me that second chance, I promise you won't regret it. The Morrison account will remain with your company," Dr. Morrison said finally. "But I want quarterly updates on your volunteer work and personal development efforts. I want to see evidence that this change is real and lasting." 6 months later, Sarah was back at Morning Brew. But everything was different now. She still came in most mornings, but she no longer claimed ownership of any particular table. Instead, she made a point of offering to share her space with anyone who seemed to need a seat. Emma had passed her medical school entrance exams with flying colors and had started her first year of studies. She still visited the coffee shop when she was home from university, and she and Sarah had developed an unlikely friendship based on mutual respect and shared growth. Sarah had kept her promises to Dr. Morrison. She was seeing a therapist regularly and had started volunteering at a mentorship program for first-generation college students. The work was challenging and sometimes uncomfortable, but it was helping her rebuild her connection to empathy and service. Marcus approached her table with her usual order and a warm smile. "Emma's flight gets in this afternoon," he said. "She'll probably be here tomorrow morning to tell us all about her first semester." Sarah smiled back. "I can't wait to hear about her experiences. She's going to make an incredible doctor." As Sarah opened her laptop to begin her morning work, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that fateful Tuesday 6 months ago. She was still successful in her career, but success now meant something entirely different. It meant using her skills and resources to lift others up, rather than protecting her own territory. The instant karma she had experienced that day had been painful, but necessary. It had forced her to confront the person she had become and choose to become someone better. In trying to block a kind young woman from sitting down, Sarah had ultimately been forced to examine whether she was sitting comfortably with who she had become. The answer had been a resounding no, and the journey to change had been the most important work of her life.